Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John McDermott, and I work for the Institute for Human Development in Flagstaff, Arizona. We are a University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities located on NAU's campus and part of Arizona's DD network. You can please come visit us at the link I'm going to post in the chat area below at any time. I'm going to take some time to familiarize you with the Adobe Connect platform. This is a good time to make audio speaker adjustments. This is a listen-only webinar. If you have any questions or comments, please utilize the chat pod in the lower right of the screen. Towards the top of some of the pods, you'll see an icon with 4 arrows. This will allow for a full screen mode on your device or computer for that particular pod. And finally, we'll be recording the webinar today to archive on our IHD YouTube channel and ADDPC's website. So you'll be able to share this later or come back and listen to it again. From this point on, I'm going to pass this over to Sarah, and she's going to welcome and introduce you to our panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Welcome, everybody. We are excited to host our first webinar. The Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council chose the topic of service animals for several reasons. One of them is that we receive many inquiries about the do's and don'ts regarding service animals, and there have been multiple bills in the state legislature this year and in years past trying to regulate the use of service animals. So let's get right into it. We'll hear first from Dorianne Pollock, who works as a disability resource specialist at Northern Arizona University. She's a guide dog user herself and serves on the alumni board of directors for Guide Dogs for the Blind. Then we'll move on to JJ Rico, who serves as the executive director at the Center for Disability Law in Tucson. His legal work primarily has focused on the employment and access provisions of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Also speaking to the legal side of things will be Chris Carlson. Chris has worked for about 4 years as an Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division for the Arizona Attorney General's Office. Next up, we'll hear from Peter Fisher, who is the citywide ADA coordinator for the city of Phoenix. He's a proud Sun Devil fan as a graduate from Arizona State with a degree in architecture and humanities. And unfortunately, we will not be hearing from Bert Rios from the Smile Independent Living Center today. Bert had an emergency injury over the weekend, but he is recovering well. So we'll miss you, Bert. But Dorianne, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. This also is my first experience with a webinar, so we'll work through it together. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Dorianne Pollock. I do work at Northern Arizona University in the Disabilities Resource Department. I am a resource coordinator. Before that, I worked for Rehabilitation Services Administration, and I've been the principal of several elementary and middle and high schools. And before that, I was a teacher in the Phoenix area in elementary school. So I'll say that I've only been a guide dog user for about 10 years. And I was thinking about what I would say today in terms of my experiences using a service dog. They've been interesting. I've had great experiences mostly. I've had some frightening experiences, and I have had some experiences that were uncomfortable, that caused some anger. So I looked at all of these situations when planning what I was going to say, and I think from when I was not a guide dog user or a service animal user, I can look back and know that as I was walking in my community or in a mall or in an airport or traveling on public transportation, I may have seen people using service animals, and I was curious, as I'm sure everybody is, curious about why the dog is there, what is the right etiquette to use when approaching somebody with a dog, is the dog friendly, why does the person have a dog, what laws protect me as a person without a dog. So those things came to mind as a person who was sighted. When I lost my sight and then came to use a service dog, I have to say that my perception changed drastically because now I had all of those answers. Now I knew all of the answers to why people have a service animal. I knew a little bit about the laws that protect a person, and I also felt incredibly confident while I was in the community. As a person who could see, I wasn't so confident when I saw a person with a service animal because I didn't have the answers. But as a person with a service animal, my confidence, my sense of independence improved drastically. And that brings me to the first point I want to make about knowledge. I think it's our responsibility as service dog users to teach people in our community rather than having an adverse reaction to community members. I think it's our golden opportunity as people using service dogs to inform our community members, to begin to build those relationships with people so that they do have an understanding and so that all of us have a common understanding as to what a service dog's function is, what the parameters in terms of the laws are regarding the use of service dogs. Because once the community understands not only how the laws protect service dogs and their handlers, but how the laws protect community members and business owners, then they become advocates. And the more advocates there are for service dog handlers and for the laws that protect service dogs and their handlers, the easier it will be to begin to identify those people who have legitimate service dogs in the community. I'm going to take about a 10-second pause. Thank you for being patient with me. I think we have a responsibility to people in our community. In fact, I know we do. We have a responsibility to the people in our community to bring them into the loop. Without community, we really can't get along. We're all dependent on each other. When we're walking down the street, when we're walking in a mall, traveling on public transit, as I've mentioned, in an airplane, we must begin to build those relationships together so that it isn't us against them or something not so friendly. As I said before, once we begin to build those relationships, then community members become advocates also. I think some of you probably would like to hear some stories that I had interacting with the public. There was one time I was waiting in an airport. I was waiting in line to board the plane, actually, and a woman came over to me and my dog and grabbed the leash, and I had my hand on the harness, my hand on the leash, and she insisted on pulling my dog in a direction that I was uncertain of. I still don't know if it was the correct direction or what line she was trying to get me in, but I was so alarmed by her trying to help me. And I believe that's what she was trying to do. She just came over and said, "Here, you need to come this way. You need to come this way." And I was quite undone because I didn't know what to do other than, "Please don't handle the leash." And I did that, and she wanted to help me. So it isn't just a matter of people being angry or people being happy. People do want to help, but they don't often know how to because they don't have that education that I was talking about earlier. They don't have the correct information about etiquette, about the do's and don'ts of service dogs and their handlers and being in the public. So that's a very good example of somebody who does want to help. I've had many experiences like that where people want to help and they will give my dog an instruction instead of me. They'll talk to the dog and give the dog come over here, go to your right, go to your right. And the dog isn't listening. So then they become more insistent, not understanding that the dog is trained to look at and listen to me. So again, it's very important to educate, and it's our opportunity to educate. And in addition to the education, I also want to say as a service dog user that service dog handlers have a huge responsibility to have a well-behaved dog. Things aren't outlined in black and white as we walk down the street or as we're riding a bike down a bike path. It isn't black and white, but I'll tell you that if someone in the community sees a handler and their dog and sees that the dog is well behaved and listening to the handler, they are much more willing to accept the situation, understand the situation, and even become an advocate for the situation, if possible. So my responsibility as a service dog handler is to make sure my dog is well behaved at all times, to make sure my dog is under my control, which usually means in a harness or on a leash, or at the very least under voice or hand control. In my case, with a guide dog for the blind, it would be a harness and a leash. The dog must be under my control at all times, well behaved and well groomed. I cannot bring a dog into a restaurant or somebody's business or the mall or on public transit even if my dog is dirty or smells. So I have a responsibility to the community to keep my dog well behaved, under my control, and well groomed, cleaned, those kinds of things, so that she's not offensive to anyone, so she doesn't scare anyone away or put anybody off in any way. I also have a responsibility to the organization who bred and raised and trained and paid for this dog. So my responsibilities run deep in terms of what I need to give back. And really, as an ambassador of service dog user, I do want to educate, and I want to encourage other people with service animals to educate their community as they come in contact with other people who could be curious or not understand a situation. It's really not a time to get angry or to pick a fight or to get into some kind of argument. It's really an opportunity to educate and bring community members along so that they too will become advocates. I think that is about what I have to say, unless I think that is, and we'll go through the panel, I understand, and I understand JJ Rico is the next person to present.
Thank you, Dorian. I think Dorian brought up some excellent points, and I'd just like you to keep in mind what she mentioned to all of you, that this is a golden opportunity to teach. And with that, I hope to teach you some about the laws that exist for service animals as they stand right now. So I'll be moving through my slides and follow along as you will, but I did provide enough content that it's there for future reference. So today we're going to talk both about the federal definition of service animal and also the Arizona state definition of service animal. As they stand today, they're almost identical, but Chris Carlson, who will speak next, will talk about some proposed legislation that may make some changes to the state law. So as it stands now, service animal means any dog that is individually trained. And I want to emphasize that the emphasis on dog. In 2010, the Department of Justice did make amendments, and instead of service animal being any service animal individually trained, it does now say service animal means any dog. It also includes miniature horses as it stands today. That service dog or miniature horse must be individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of an individual with a disability. That can include physical, sensory, or psychiatric, intellectual, or mental disabilities. So other species of animal, whether wild or domestic, trained or untrained, are no longer service animals under the definition, the federal definition. And the work or task performed by a service animal must be directly related to the handler's disability. Moving forward, some of the examples and types of tasks that these service dogs or miniature horses could perform would be to assist during a seizure, alert during a seizure or just before a seizure, retrieve one's medicine or other items, help individuals remain grounded, sometimes in the event of maybe a flare-up of a mental illness, a outburst of some sort. A service dog can alert the person or keep them grounded by performing an action like putting their paws on the person, licking their hand to distract them and calm them down. But again, it has to be individually trained to perform that task. And that's an example of preventing or interrupting an impulsive or destructive behavior, and also assisting with balance or stability. And this is where miniature horses come into play. I assisted someone who utilized a miniature horse in a more rugged terrain in Arizona, and a miniature horse provided much more stability and strength related to pulling the wheelchair and then also providing stability when the person was able to walk. Next slide. The important thing to remember if we have business owners on this webinar, or even if you don't, even if you're a user of a service animal, there are only two questions that currently exist that a business owner can ask you if you use a service animal. And that's, is this service animal required because of a disability? And what work or task is the animal trained to perform? Now that may come as a surprise because representing many individuals with disabilities, we hear about many questions that are asked, requests for documentation, requests for certification, but as the law stands today, those are the only two questions that can be asked of you if you utilize a service animal. So you can't ask a person about their disability. So if a business owner is inquiring about the nature of your disability, or a question that I've heard a lot is, well, you do not look like you have a disability, or you don't look disabled, those questions can't be asked, and hopefully you do not receive those comments. But if you do, I think Dorian's message of becoming an advocate and educating the community and educating the business owner is the proper way, a practical way to would say is that I am a person with a disability, and this is my service animal, and they assist me in this way, and calmly as possible, because sometimes that can lead to an argument. Requesting documentation of formal training. Again, if you go back 2 slides and look back at the definition, it's individually trained. It does not say formal training. It does not say training through a dog or miniature horse training facility. It can be trained by the individual themselves. Certification. A lot of times folks say, well, where's your certificate from the Service Dogs of America or some other organization that exists or one can find online? That's not required. Now, practically speaking, I have many clients who've encountered some of these barriers or resistance by business owners, and they do carry information if they have it. Some carry pictures of their service dog or a certificate if it was trained at a particular school, but that's at their choice. It's not required, but because they've encountered barriers, they come prepared with that information. And as a practical advice, I have no problem with them doing that. I just want to let you all know that it's not required. You can't ask for an additional payment. So if someone's you're going to a hotel and you're reserving a room and you mention that you have a service dog, you are not supposed to be charged the pet deposit that a person who's bringing their pet would be required to pay, because a service animal is not a pet. They can exclude you from most settings. One of the rare limitations would be healthcare setting, an operating room, burn units where, again, pet dander and other items related to pets may interfere with that function or that task related to performing surgery. So those are a very limited exception to where service animals can gain access. So another question that we receive a lot is, what about emotional support or protection animals? Now, a dog's whose sole function is to the provision of emotional support, just the well-being and comfort or companionship, are not considered service dogs under the ADA. Second bullet point reads, the use of service dogs for psychiatric and neurological disabilities is explicitly protected under the ADA. Now, one may be confused on, well, what's the difference? And again, the big difference is, does that service animal, that service dog, perform a function related to your disability? So for example, I had a client who had post-traumatic stress disorder, and there was times where in certain situations his PTSD may have manifested itself, or he might have started getting anxious, a little agitated. His dog was individually trained to warn him that he was getting in that kind of starting to act out or starting to feel anxious, and he was trained to lick him first on his hand, put his paw on him second, and then put 2 paws on him third if he was not able to recognize the cues. But that's individually trained to perform that task, as opposed to an emotional support animal who's there for one's comfort. It's not performing a task, but is comforting the person just by being there. It's lacking the training related to the disability. The last point is the crime deterrent effects of an animal's presence does not qualify. So if you've trained a service animal, trained a dog to protect you, even if you're a person with a disability, if that's its sole purpose to deter others, unfortunately the Department of Justice has said that that is not a service animal by the new definition. Again, that is the new definition. There are some exceptions to that rule in the fair housing context, and if the ADDPC would like us to come back and train on the Fair Housing Act and the provisions related to emotional support animals and service animals, I'd be happy to do so. So as I said, I covered the next slide in my description of distinguishing the difference between an emotional support versus a service animal. This does not, a lot of folks in the community believe that if you're a person with a psychiatric disability, you cannot have a service animal. And I do want to clearly state that that is not true. If the service animal is performing a task related to your psychiatric disability, it is a service animal by the definition. When can a service animal be excluded or removed? One of the things to understand as a service animal user or as a business owner is there are times where a service animal, just like a customer, could be removed from public facility, a restaurant. Let's use the restaurant example. If the animal is out of control and the animal's handler does not take effective action to control it, that could be an opportunity that a restaurant owner could remove that service animal. And I think Dorianne, I thought excellently described as a service animal user, you're taking control of your service animal. They're under control. You make sure of that in any time that you're going out into public. If the animal is not housebroken, a restaurant owner in my example could remove or ask that the service animal be removed from the restaurant. The third bullet point, the public accommodation or entity is not responsible for the care or supervision of the service animal. So although you have a service animal, you cannot ask that restaurant owner, can you take my service dog out to use the restroom? The service dog is your responsibility as the user of that service animal. And then also public accommodations are still required to allow the handler, even if the animal is excluded. So there are situations where the animal can be excluded, but that does not mean that the owner has to be excluded as well. Now, in practical, in real life situations, both the service animal user and the service animal, when they're excluded, are going to go with each other for the most part. I've had one situation I can think of where somebody, the service animal was excluded. They had a friend pick up the service animal and they stayed at this public accommodation. That was a rare exception. And I'll pass the microphone over to Chris Carlson.
Hi, JJ, thank you. I have significantly less to say than JJ, mostly because, as you noted at the top, the Arizona definition of service animal currently, as it stands, is nearly identical to the federal definition of service animal. The Arizona law contains less specificity than the federal law, and even more so, the Code of Federal Regulations, which defines the federal service animal laws to a large degree, is a lot more specific than any Arizona rules regarding service animals. There is one distinction I wanted to note, which may or may not be useful depending on what gets passed in the new law, which is that Arizona Revised Statute 11-1024 states that a public accommodation may ask only if the animal is a service animal being used because of a disability, whereas the federal law only allows proprietors to ask if the animal is required because of a disability in order to gauge whether an animal qualifies as a service animal, so they can be a little bit more specific under federal law about whether or not the animal is actually a service animal or not. More to the point, the Arizona Revised Statutes under the Civil Rights Act, which is Title 41, it includes a section which basically incorporates all of federal law, which is that compliance with Titles 2 and 3 of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it's implementing regulations under the Code of Federal Regulations, shall be deemed compliance with the Arizona law, and the rules adopted under this article, so adopted by the state of Arizona, shall not exceed the regulations, guidelines, and standards relating to Titles 2 and 3 of the ADA. And I think that should underscore how closely Arizona law currently comports with the federal law, which is, to say again, it is almost identical in every way. Now, there are going to be some changes, or there could potentially be changes in Arizona service law. There are currently two bills, SB 1166 and SB 1167, which are going to change the service law definitions in Arizona law if they are passed. I believe they're currently still being debated, and they are changing pretty rapidly, even as we've prepared for this course. Now, Senate Bill 1166 creates criminal penalties for falsely or fraudulently claiming to be the owner or trainer of a service animal. And the first offense carries a civil penalty of $250, and any subsequent offense can be criminal in that it can be a Class 2 misdemeanor. Now, SB 1166 also has a number of formalistic changes to the law that are going to bring it even more in line potentially with the federal laws. Specifically, the bill also has technical changes which require a service animal to always be leashed or harnessed unless it's unable to be leashed or harnessed. It requires the service animal to be under the handler's control. So again, things that are currently required under federal law probably would be required under state law by reference to the federal law, but are going to be more specific in the statute going forward. And again, the statute that it's changing is ARS 11-1024. Other formalistic changes are it allows the public accommodation to ask what work or task the service animal has been trained to perform, requires a public place to allow the individual to return without a service animal if that individual has been asked to remove the animal, and it deems it not discriminatory for the operator of a public place to exclude the service animal if the animal is out of control or not housebroken. But again, the biggest change, and certainly the biggest change where the Arizona law is going to be different than the federal law, is that it creates those penalties, the $250 for the first offense and a Class 2 misdemeanor for subsequent offenses for falsely or fraudulently claiming to be the owner or trainer of a service animal. Senate Bill 1167 is really the Arizona definition for animal cruelty, and it adds a number of provisions regarding service animals to the definition for animal cruelty. Specifically, it amends the definition to include the intentional or knowing interference with a service animal, or the reckless, intentional, or knowing killing or harming of a service animal, and makes those acts a Class 6 felony. And it also creates another section, which is certainly the biggest change to the law, which would be ARS 13-2910.10, which will prohibit those convicted of animal cruelty from owning or using service animals in the future without permission from the court, which, I don't know how those things are going to work out, but that is what the bills are intended to do. And again, neither of those have been passed yet, but they are currently in the legislature and awaiting passage. So with that, I will hand it off to Peter.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Thanks, Dorian, JJ, and Chris. And I really want to thank the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council for putting on this important webinar. I think it was timely, and I'm glad that we're able to do that. My name is Peter Fisher. I'm the ADA coordinator for the City of Phoenix. I've been at this position for just over 2 years, and I see how important this topic on service animals is. I'd like to discuss a few of the real-life scenarios that the City of Phoenix has seen, and then we'll get into some question and answer after that. So my first case is from Echo Canyon Trailhead. It's a park here in Phoenix that does not allow dogs on that trail. One of our park rangers approached a family with a poodle. The family was asked the appropriate questions that you just learned, and one of the family members, a young boy, he happily answered that his dog was trained to smell the glucose on his breath, and that was to alert if he had dangerous levels or lower levels, presumably for his childhood diabetes. That was a great answer and good enough for our park ranger, so the family was allowed to proceed with the dog on the trail. There was no incident following that matter either. So another situation came about. Another hiker on a came off a trail. Again, this was a no dogs type of a trail. And they were still waiting at the end of the trailhead after they had taken their hike. And a ranger had observed a dog on a leash that had growled at a passerby. The hiker claimed that the dog was a service animal in training and that they had some work to do, but they were still learning. The ranger then told me that she was a bit concerned about that, and if she knew that information beforehand, she may have asked them not to take the trail with the dog, been a little more hesitant to allow them to proceed. And although that is true, that the U.S. Department of Justice claims that a service animal must already be trained before it can be taken into public, the City of Phoenix has chosen to allow animals that are still in training. In this case, the dog was then considered a service animal, even though it was still in training, and the dog was treated just as a fully trained service animal would be. We also recognize that a qualifying event, like mentioned before, like aggressive behavior, or the animal not being housebroken, would make it ineligible as a service animal, and therefore it could have been removed. But that wasn't the case here either. So another issue, as always, what are the bad actors? Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? I think that's one of the things we're trying to distinguish the difference between as staff or workers at the city level, or in your own private business for that matter. So within the past few months, we had a patron at City Hall that had a service animal that bit another patron on the leg as she was walking with the animal. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the person? How do we remove them from the situation when the dog isn't in control? I prefer to use the common sense approach. If the animal is acting like a dog, not behaving like a service animal, not working properly, then it's a dog. It's acting as a dog. It's a pet. And dogs are not allowed in Phoenix facilities, and therefore the animal can be removed. Another topic was at the airport. It's a little muddier in this situation because there are different guidelines for transportation and at airports, in the airplanes themselves, or in cabs or buses. But to leave that aside, there was a woman who was traveling from Oregon to New Jersey with a layover here at Sky Harbor. Her assistance dog needed to relieve itself, yet the animal and the owner had to exit security. They had to be escorted, and they had to use an outdoor facility for the animal. That service animal didn't make it. We chose in this circumstance that even though the dog had defecated, it was still indeed housebroken. It was just an unfortunate situation. So that service animal still claimed to be a service animal. It was a good actor, and we did what we had to do appropriately. I also want you to note that Sky Harbor is working diligently right now to provide animal relief areas inside the security checkpoints, and that's something that's not yet required by law, but we know how important it is for those people with service animals. So communication is the key. With that animal, with that service animal owner, with the animal, the service animal handlers. One assistant could take a sight-impaired dog and owner across a moving sidewalk at the airport. The owner therefore ended up tripping, and the dog freaked out because it had never been on that moving sidewalk before. So it's imperative that we communicate with that handler that we're walking onto an unusual situation that maybe they wouldn't want to walk their service animal across. So communicate with the persons you're with as much as possible. So using common sense, I guess, is my biggest point. My perspective is really to recognize reality when respect to service animals, or what a comfort animal might be, or if it's a pet. 99% of the time you'll succeed if you just use your common sense. We have to remember that these animals, they're not just animals, they're not just tools for someone's life, they're family members in many cases. And they are there to help many people when their needs and possibly in crisis. If you have any questions related to the City of Phoenix, any of our policies, or anything that I've said that I could help you with, please don't hesitate to contact me. My info is on the screen right now, and I'm going to throw it back to the group because I think we're going to do some question and answer now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for presenting. If you would like, the chat area in the lower right is the opportunity for you to ask questions. Please type them there, and we'll field them in the order that we receive them. Thank you.
As we wait for questions to flow into the chat box, I just want to extend another thank you to our presenters for sharing their expertise with us today. It's been really informative for me. I'm not a service animal user, but I know this is a topic that a lot of people have questions about right now, and it's very relevant. So thank you again, everyone.
We have our first question. Teresa states, it is my understanding that service dogs no longer need to wear a vest stating they are service animals. Is this correct?
I could probably field that question. No, service animals are not required to wear a vest that says that they are a service animal. That part of the language of the changes proposed in SB 1166 would have required that, but those changes have been amended out of the bill that's currently pending.
Thank you, Chris. Would anyone else like to say anything about that, or can we continue to the next question? All right. Vicky asks, what is the liability of an employer if a service animal bites another employee? Personal liability or the handler's responsibility?
So is this a situation, and I'm not entirely clear, where an employee is using a service animal and then that service animal bites another employee? It's hard to tell. Or whether it's a patron whose service animal bites an employee.
Vicky states yes, 2 employees.
Maybe JJ can field this one. I don't want to say if anyone is liable or not.
I'll just say that, employer liability, is not really our area. We represent the person with the disability and the service animal. So the employer in that situation may want to talk to their own labor counsel and inquire on what they're liable for.
Chris and JJ, I'm not a lawyer. This is Pete Fisher. I'm not a lawyer. However, we have seen this in the city of Phoenix. Generally, from my knowledge, it is the handler's responsibility. If there is an injury occurred, that the handler would be the one who would be the one to deal with.
Without stating what the actual legal standard is, because I just don't know it off the top of my head, I would say that that would all most certainly be true, except if it was clear that the animal was a danger to others and the proprietor or the owner acted with a reckless disregard to the safety of others in his handling of the situation. That's generally what tort law would allow in terms of liability in that situation. But again, I can't speak to that with certainty as a lawyer for the state of Arizona because we don't get into that issue.
Thank you. I have a next question from Kent Brown.
John, sorry. Before you go there, I saw a question from Julie Maxwell above Teresa's that you read that said, are you aware of any talks of having service dogs eventually in school for children with special needs? And just to address that question briefly, I'm not sure if there's any talks about that, Julie, but service animals should be allowed in schools for children with disabilities. And there are a few cases out there, and the Center for Disability Law has successfully assisted a few students in making sure they had their service animals with them. So I'm not sure of talks, but again, it is service animals allowed in a school if it's related to the child's disability.
Thanks, JJ, for picking that up. Sorry about that, Julie, for missing that. I'm going to move on to Ken Brown. He states, I have a service dog, live in the East Valley, must go down to 40th Street in Washington for transit to approve me for discounted bus tickets. Any plans in the future to make this process easier for the disabled?
Yeah, Ken, actually, I don't know of any plans with the city to have that changed, but if you could send me an email to peter.fisher, Fischer, at phoenix.gov, I will work with Valley Metro to see if they have any alternate options there. It is a collaborative with Valley Metro and the City of Phoenix for those type of things. So it's not specifically my task, but I would be glad to help you with it.
Thank you, Peter. Moving on, Christina asks, I'm a landlord for severely mentally ill tenants. Most tenants have a therapy animal and provide a letter from their doctor stating this. Is there a distinct difference between a service animal and a therapy animal?
This is JJ. I'll take that question. There can be. It depends on whether that, when you put therapy animal in quotes, if it's a doctor using that language, it could be a service animal or it could be an emotional support animal. What's important to address in your question is that you're a landlord and you have tenants, which then I'm implying that you serve folks under the Fair Housing Act. And under the Fair Housing Act, emotional support, therapy animals, and service animals are all allowed in that context. And I direct you to a HUD guidance letter that addresses that question and clearly says that the Fair Housing Act still applies to emotional support animals.
Thank you, JJ. I'm going to move on to Lauren. And she states, I was informed recently, I have not seen them myself, that Valley Metro buses are posting signs stating that mental health dogs are not allowed on the bus. Is this true?
Yeah, Lauren, I actually was involved with Valley Metro when they provided and started planning these rack cards that are going on the buses. That's not completely accurate. Everything that was stated on the cards is 100% true when it comes to the transportation rules with service animals, which also transportation is a little more lenient than what we discussed here today.
Thank you, Peter. I have a question from Jerry, and he asks, what is being done to prevent fake service animal from the public sector?
Again, this is Chris. The current legislation being proposed has a number of protections that get to that issue. And again, first under the Senate Bill 1166, it creates criminal penalties for falsely or fraudulently claiming to be the owner or trainer of a service animal, with a civil penalty of $250 for first offense and a Class 2 misdemeanor for subsequent offenses.
This is Dorianne, and I would just like to say something about that question also. I said earlier when I was speaking that the more educated our community is, the easier it will be for everyone to become advocates, because what we're asking, I think, as service dog handlers, users, is to have community advocates, but then our responsibility is that our dogs will be under control, housebroken, well behaved, and clean. And I think that if you look at especially the behavior of a dog and a dog under your control, it becomes easier and easier to figure out or see which dogs have really been trained to perform a service as a service dog and which haven't. And I think behavior is the first key. So in terms of the reality of the situation, I certainly welcome the legislation, but in terms of the day-to-day walking from one restaurant to a shopping center or to a grocery store, if the dog that you see and the handler that you see are not under control and working together as a team, that could be a good initial sign that it might be fraudulent or ill-trained.
Thank you, Dory. Laura, I'm not sure if they've addressed your question, but I'm going to state it out loud. In regards to SB 1166, I don't understand how someone will be able to get cited for having a fraudulent fake service animal when a service animal owner does not need to have any proof. This is really not an enforceable law, so what is the point?
I suppose I should address that, but the only thing I can say to that is that I can't answer that question.
This is JJ. I mean, again, it's proposed legislation at this point. If it passes, we'll have to see how they intend to enforce it. As it exists now, how service animal users' interaction with the public or business owners take place. Usually the police are called. I've represented clients who've had trespassing citations issued by police departments. But I think it goes back to part of what Dorianne said about educating not only yourselves and being individuals with service animals, but also the community. And I think the more and more that business owners, police departments are educated on what a service animal is and the various functions for all different kinds of disabilities that service animal can perform will help. And whether a law like this is necessary or not may not be affected, but at the same time, I think education is needed regardless.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question. If a person with a physical disability has a service animal to get through security at the airport, what if the person uses a wheelchair?
I'll try to answer this for you to some degree. I am a person who uses a wheelchair. TSA is set up to screen and service anybody with a service animal, a cane, a crutch, or a wheelchair. They have figured out ways to do it. It might take a little extra time, but I'm sure that it can be done. And just speak with them would probably be the best choice to get a better answer, but I wouldn't be concerned about it if you're in need of any of those.
Thank you, Peter. As you can read, there's a response from Laura, and then I'm looking to see if Carol, you can read Carol's answer to a previous question about mental health dogs. We're going to move down to Nanette. I wonder if signage about the penalty will help deter those who are considering a service dog. Where do you post these? Maybe on a business website or arena if possible. I think Nanette is asking where these potentially could be posted.
This is JJ. I guess at this point it's a proposed legislation at the time it passes. I mean, I think that's business owners' decision to post something or not. I mean, we see plenty of service animals welcome signs. I think that's continues to be an emphasis of ours at the Center for Disability Law, and for business owners, it's their choice of what type of signage they feel they need to post, but we always appreciate when we see service animals welcome.
I would agree that even if it does become a law, which I personally don't believe it will, if we keep our signage in the positive, promoting the better use rather than the negative, then I think we're in a better place.
Thank you, everyone, for your comments, and thank you to the presenters for fielding the questions. We still have a little bit of time left, about 6 minutes, and if anyone else has a question, please feel free to put it in the chat box. And just as a reminder, you can use the scroll tab to the right to sort of move through the chat area if you would like, if there's something that you want to read over. And since a couple people have asked, in the upper right of the screen, you can download the PDF version of the PowerPoint and also our DD Network one-pager.
John, this is Sarah. Maybe you'd like to address the process for sending out the archived webinar presentation once we have that link available, and then possibly direct people to the poll where everyone can share their ideas for other webinar topics that you would like to see from us here at the Planning Council.
Sure thing. It will take quite possibly up to 1 or 2 days to get the copied or the archived version up to our YouTube channel. At that point, I'll be able to share with the ADDPC, and you can probably check back on their website. That is the link for our YouTube channels for IHD, and that's where most of our webinars that we've hosted with state agencies and individuals in Arizona are posted. You can always go check those out. There you go. You'll see in the middle right of the screen, someone has placed an answer to our polling question, and that's please list any ideas for future webinar topics. Please feel free to populate that list and share with us some topic ideas that you'd like. I also have one more link here. This is a small SurveyMonkey survey, and if there were questions that that were not addressed, we can go back to this link, and I've placed a multiple choice question that you can click on one of the presenters, and then you can put a question in, and we'll direct that question to the presenter as soon as we get any responses in that survey. Lauren, I will work on getting you a copy of the closed caption transcripts. I feel like there was an option to be able to download them within that pod, but if not, I'll go and look and try to get that to you. I believe that's it. We're closing in. If there's any other questions, please put it into the chat area. I see that, Lauren. Yeah, I'll work on that, and I'll try to get you a copy of that. And can I get a copy of this with questions and comments? Yes, I have been copy pasting the questions over onto a separate document. The comments, you would have to see our archive version. This is for Jane asking the question, can I get a copy of this with questions and comments? And please feel free to contact me, IHD at nau.edu at any time for questions concerning this webinar. And then you can also contact ADDPC. You're very welcome. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating in today's webinar. And please utilize those links to ask us more questions or to check back and see when this is archived. We'll go from here, and we appreciate your participation. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for allowing me to participate with you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
You got the same grunge everyone else? You sound like my husband. He gets that wet throat and chest and or talk for you.
I have terrible sinuses.
Oh,